the right resolution, the just resolution to the problems that were going on. Right? And that's where we finished up with last week. That brings us to verse number 29 of chapter 11. And we see now God testing the sincerity of Jephthah. Jephthah has been sincere throughout this whole account, and he begins to, God is going to not judge, but kind of test the sincerity of Jephthah as well. Okay, so let's go to verse number 29 of Judges chapter 11. I don't know either. Let me see if I can make it do its thing. I don't know. Let's just turn it off here. I'll see if that fixes it. You can go to our fourth, I think it's the fourth point, Chad. Yeah, it's Roman numeral 4. There's what I was thinking. There we go. I've got it. What the... We'll with that one later. I don't know. I must have hit a button. All right, guys. You can keep going. Or an 8. Should be back. I think it's not. I share it with. I tried. I pulled it up last week. You weren't here. It's fine. Don't worry about it. No big deal. All right. So God's going to judge Jephthah's sincerity here, and we're going to first off by seeing in verses 29 through 31. We're going to see a vow here that Jephthah is going to make. Dealing with it, realizing that the outcome of the battle here that they are in is taking place. So go to verse 29, read down to verse 31 to start off with. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and he passed over Gilead and Manasseh, and passed over Mizpah of Gilead, and from Mizpah of Gilead he passed over into the children of Ammon. And Jephthah vowed a vow unto the Lord, and said, If thou shalt without fail deliver the children of Ammon into mine hands, then it shall be that whatsoever cometh forth of the doors of my house to meet me, when I return in peace from the children of Ammon, shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. So realizing here again, the outcome of the battle is going to depend, Jephthah says, on whom? Who is the outcome of the battle going to depend on? God, right? The Lord. He says it's going to depend on the Lord. So he offers to God whoever, whatever first met him, no matter what it was, right? Whatever first met him when he returned victorious from battle, that God honored Jephthah. He vowed that he would offer that to God. So whatever he has, whatever he sees, whatever he gets, whatever he first encounters, when he gets back from the success of the war, he's going to offer that back to God. Okay? The battle then is going to ensue, verses 32 and 33, and God is going to honor Jephthah in delivering the Ammonites unto him. Right? So, verse 32, Jephthah passed over unto the children of Ammon to fight against them, and the Lord delivered them into his hands. And he smote them from Aor, and even till thou come to Minnith, even 20 cities into the plain of the vineyards, with a very great slaughter. Thus the children of Ammon were subdued before the children of Israel. So we see now, after this has been quite some time now, we finally see Jephthah and the Israelites come in and take over the Ammonites. And there's a great slaughter, as it says. Israel now has been successfully delivered from the oppression of the Ammonites. The Lord has allowed the Ammonites to be delivered into the hands of Jephthah. So he successfully delivers them from their oppression and then forces the enemy back to their original boundaries that they were started off with as we first started this lesson several weeks ago now. Okay, so looking at Jephthah's vow, the vow was, when I win the victory, the very first thing that I see or whoever I meet, I'm going to be offered up back to you. So now we've seen Jephthah win. Now we see what happens with this vow that Jephthah makes. Go to verse number 34. And Jephthah came to Mizpah unto his house, and the very first thing that he sees is what? His daughter, right? So he comes back to his house, and behold, his daughter came out to meet him with timbrels and with dances. Not only was she his daughter, but she was what? His only child, right? Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. So we go back to Jephthah's vow. The very first thing that I meet when I grace the boundaries or my front door, whoever that is, right? I'm going to offer that back to you for giving me this victory. Okay? First thing Jephthah sees is his pride and joy, right? His only daughter. So now we can kind of see what he's going to do with this vow and see what would become of the vow. Now, so he returns home and he sees his daughter, and then we see in verse 35, right? He sees and sees his daughter. She's the first thing he sees, and he remembers the vow that he made. And it came to pass that when he saw her, he rent his clothes and said, Alas, my daughter, thou hast brought me very low, and thou art one of them that trouble me. For I have opened my mouth unto the Lord, and I cannot go back. So remembering his vow, we see him expressing remorse here because his return and his meeting his daughter first means that he has to offer up his daughter to the Lord. Because of that, okay. So we see now that we see at the end of verse 35 that anything else would have been fine, right? But you're the one that showed up, and we see that he's going to be sincere in his vow because he says at the end of verse 35 what? Because I told the Lord I opened my mouth and I can't go back on the vow that I've made, right? So he understands now he's going to have to return to give his daughter up to the Lord. Verse 36, and we see the response now of his daughter. And she said unto him, My father, if thou hast opened thy mouth unto the Lord, do to me according to that which proceedeth out of thy mouth. For as much as the Lord hath taken vengeance for thee of thine enemies, even of the children of Ammon. Verse 37, she also says to her father, that this thing be done for me. Let me alone 2 months, that I may go up and down upon the mountains and bewail my virginity, I and my fellows. So he tells her essentially what has taken place, and we see her response. She readily agrees here, right? She readily agrees to fulfill the vow of the offer of his daughter to the Lord. She, however, she does, though, ask for 2 months to bewail her virginity with her friends. And then we see verses 38 through 40 that Jephthah grants this request, and his daughter is kept to her work. And he said, Go, and he sent her away for 2 months, and she went with her companions and bewailed her virginity upon the mountains. And it came to pass at the end of the 2 months that she returned to her father, who did with her according to his vow, which he had vowed, and she knew no man. And it was a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went yearly to lament the daughters of Jephthah, the Gileadite, 4 days in a year. All right, so the manner here with which Jephthah fulfills his vow is really key to kind of understanding or discerning the character of Jephthah, the man himself. Now, it's admittedly here probably not an easy matter to settle. There's 2 major kind of views here that have kind of come from this event that has taken place after the way in which Jephthah kind of fulfilled his vows. All right. One view, and I'll give both of them. One view here is that he offered his daughter as an actual burnt sacrifice. Right. So when he tells to the Lord that whatever shows up first, I will offer back. One view is that people think, or scholars or theologians or smarter people than me that have done more research on this than I have, think that he was actually offering her up as a burnt sacrifice, or he would would offer whatever it was up as a burnt sacrifice unto the Lord. In that, the other view is that he offered her to the Lord as a living sacrifice, right? So those are the two kind of ideals here that people think that Jephthah was meaning when he had this vow with the Lord. In that, the other view here of her being a living sacrifice, that he offered her to God as services in the tabernacle. And since she was a perpetual virgin, didn't know a man, wasn't married, that she would be a servant in the tabernacle to the Lord. The second of these, him offering her up to be a servant of God, working in the tabernacle, doing whatever God wanted her to do, really kind of falls more in line with what we've seen from Jephthah up till this point. Kind of the character that he's had throughout all of this account as well. We know Jephthah the whole time here has been a man of faith who is really well acquainted with Israel's history. Right, before the battle here, before this even kind of took place, he goes through a whole monologue, right, of all the things that God has done, how God's brought him out of Egypt, across the Red Sea, then how he took care of them in the wilderness, the numerous times that he has brought them out of oppression in the last several hundred years as well. So Jephthah was a man of godly character. He was a man that knew Israel's history. So him offering up his daughter not as a burnt sacrifice, but as just a living servant or a living sacrifice falls more in line with kind of what we've seen with him. A person of that character is not going to make a rash vow of giving up whatever it was. First thing he saw was a burnt sacrifice to God, right? He's not going to make that rash of something that would essentially kind of violate God's law directly. So that's what his vow was in offering up of the daughter. And we see him doing exactly that, just as he said he would. Now, we've seen Gideon, we've seen some of these other judges, we've seen some of the people of Israel kind of go back, right? They've made these promises to God. Things have then been better, and then they've kind of reneged essentially on those promises. Jephthah doesn't do that. He holds true to his word, holds true to what he promised that he would do for God. And because of that, Jephthah has a pretty good legacy within the book of Judges. And if we kind of just step back for a second and consider the greater context of what the book of Judges is, the vow episode here with Jephthah fits in really, really well. Jephthah makes this vow simply out of what? He makes the vow to give back to God whatever it is he sees first. If God gives him victory, his vow is a faith vow, right? And whatever it is, Lord, that's fine. You can have it because I know that you are going to allow me to have victory, and the victory is going to come through you. So he has a vow, gives this vow a promise to God out of faith in God. God then uses that promise, right, to test Jephthah's sincerity, right? He wants to see how sincere he is in his promise to God. God could have allowed anything to come to the door first, right? He could have allowed the family pet to show up, or a brother, or anything. God purposely made sure that it was his only daughter that showed up first to test exactly how sincere Jephthah was. The daughter's response to this, I think, is also very, very telling how the way in which that Jephthah was raising her, right? The things he was passing on to her as well. We see in verse 36 and 37 again, if you just flip back over there with me, that when he tells her what has taken place, she says to him, if thou hast opened thy mouth unto the Lord, do according to what you have said, right? You've made a promise to God. Whatever the promise is, you have to keep it. That's what you have to do. And we see the response here from the daughter. What could she have done, right? Jephthah shows up. She's obviously, still very young in life. Has her whole life ahead of her. She's not been married yet. Has her whole life to kind of dreams and aspirations to do a whole bunch of things. Her response could have been what? Jephthah comes to her and says, listen, this is what I did. This is what I said. I've got to give you to God. Her response could have been rebellion, right? She could have been, you made that decision for me. I don't have any choice in the matter. She could have been very rebellious, a very immature response, could have just ran away, could have gotten mad, could have gotten upset. There's a whole bunch of different ways in which she could have responded. But we see her responding with maturity and submission, right? Which leads us to see that Jephthah has instilled in her and been teaching her the same lessons, the same characteristics, the same importance of faith and sincerity in your faith to her as well, which is being totally opposite, right, of what the Israelites have done throughout the entire book of Judges. Right? An overall theme I mentioned a lot of times up here as we've been going through the book of Judges is that some of the reason why the Israelites kept falling right back into the same sin and then it being even worse is because they were not taking the time to teach the younger generations the importance of faith, the importance of what God had done for them. They weren't going back and telling them the history. Like the older generation was not passing that along, right? And that's why we kept seeing them falling back into the same sin. Jephthah obviously has been taking some serious time here to teach his daughter the history of Israel, the importance of faith in God, what it means to be sincere in your relationship with God. And we see that in her response, right? Something that we tell our kids, we tell my kids, I tell the kids as I coach. It's not the problems that make people, right? It's how you respond to those problems. You're going to fail. You're going to mess up. You're going to get knocked down. You're going to have problems in your life. That's a given. It's not the fact that you have those things. Everybody's going to have those things. A true test of your character and a true test for Christians of your faith in God is the way in which you respond, right? Do you get mad? Do you kick and scream? Do you have a self-pity party? Is it woe is me all the time? Do you want to complain and bellyache about how terrible things are going on in your life? Or do you respond with faith in God? God's going to bring me through this. This is here for a reason. Yeah, this stinks. Yeah, this is hard. Yeah, I don't like this, but I understand it's for my own good. God is bringing me through something. God is bringing me into something. He's teaching me a lesson. He's purifying my relationship. Do you see things in that way? The response to the problems is better. It reveals more about your character than the fact that you're having problems at all. And obviously, Jephthah here is teaching that to his daughter. Okay? That is being passed on. If all of the Israelites would have been doing the same thing, the book of Judges would not have existed. Right? This wouldn't have been here. These problems for these generations would never shown up because that's not what they were doing. Jephthah was. A typical lady at any time period would not have responded the way that Jephthah's daughter did. It shows here that he was teaching her to trust God and to submit to Him no matter how He leads. We never even see her entertain the idea of not going through with the vow. It was never even a thought, right? It was never even a thought for her to go back on this vow. If Jephthah's daughter did in fact end up dedicating her life to service to God, which we can assume that she probably did, could anyone argue that her life was now worse off after the vow than before the vow? Absolutely not, right? Because a life in service of God is never wasted, right? A life in service of God is never wasted. Now, it's conceivable, just understanding a small snippet here of the character of Jephthah's daughter, that she probably rejoiced in the end to live her life dedicated to God. And now think about the legacy that Jephthah has too, right? His sincerity, his faithfulness to God is really rare, especially in the time period that we're looking at now in the life of Israel. He shines as a light in a dark time in Israel. No doubt he rejoices in the end to be remembered as such a man, even though he never had a chance to bounce one of his grandbabies on his knee. But his legacy goes far beyond that because of what he was able to do. Okay? Before we move on here to God judging Ephraim's insincerity, a couple of things more about Jephthah's daughter here. some arguments here, like I kind of gave you about what actually took place here. Here's kind of some more things that I've jotted down. Kind of goes with kind of a summary of things here that shows that Jephthah's daughter here was offered in a lifetime of service. Over in Exodus chapter 38, as well as in 1 Samuel, you see 2 or 3 different instances where you have women serving within the tabernacle. Okay, if you will, just flip over and I'll just give you one of them. Go over to Exodus in chapter 38. And look at verse number 8. Exodus 38 and verse number 8. And he made the laver of brass, and the foot of it brass, of the looking glasses of the women assembling, which assembled at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. Okay, flip over to 1 Samuel with me as well. And go to chapter number 2 of 1 Samuel and look at verse 22. Now Eli was very old, and heard all that his sons did in Israel, or did unto all of Israel, and how they lay with the women that assembled at the doors of the tabernacle of the congregation. Now that wasn't a great instance there, but it's obviously evidence that there were women serving in the tabernacles. This was not an uncommon thing, right? So when Jephthah made this vow, this was probably in the back of his mind somewhere, because this was obviously a common thing that was taking place. There were women, in fact, that were serving at the tabernacle. On the counter to her, on the opposite end of that, human sacrifice, right? If Jephthah was offering her up as a burnt sacrifice to God, human sacrifice, according to the law, was what? It's wrong, right? It completely goes against the Old Testament law. Leviticus chapter 18, Leviticus chapter 20, we go through several instances there that talks about the wrongness or contrariness of human sacrifice to the Old Testament law. Now, we know that the pagans are sacrificing their children to their gods. Pastor Rob's talking about Moloch for several weeks now has mentioned that. Some of that was going on. We know there was human sacrifices going on to Baal as well. That was something that pagans did, was offering up their children as human sacrifices. It is unlikely that a man here who knew Israel's history, who knew Israel's law, it's very highly unlikely that he would offer up his daughter as a human sacrifice, right? Jephthah, on several occasions now, previously has exhibited a great respect for God, a great respect for the law, and a great respect for the heritage of the Israelites. So he's not going to offer up his child as a human sacrifice. Thirdly, here, the priest at the tabernacle would not have even allowed him to offer his daughter as a human sacrifice, right? They wouldn't even allow that to take place. He wouldn't be able to bring her in and offer her up, because that would have gone against their law as well. It is unlikely that the men of Gilead would have permitted that to take place either. The daughter's reason for wanting to go visit her friends for a couple months was to bewail her virginity, right? It was not to bewail her death, right? She went to realize that she was going to be this. She was going to be unmarried forever. She was not going to have children, so she was going to took 2 months to go do that, not to bewail her death. And then you get to verse 39 of chapter 11. It goes on and kind of says, right, that she knew no man. Obviously, she was there working in the tabernacle. Was a servant there in the tabernacle. Favors the explanation for her being offered up as a living sacrifice unto God by working in the tabernacle as well. Okay, so that stops us right there with Jephthah and his daughter for a second. That brings us into Judges chapter 12, in which we can now finish up this lesson here in chapter 12. We see God still judging the sincerity of these people in this account. He's going to go now to Ephraim and judge their sincerity as well. So this is the final episode in the judgeship of Jephthah. And we're going to see this is going to further give us evidence, solidify that Jephthah was a very solid man of faith. He was extremely sincere in his worship of God, and that God is going to use him to reinforce his own desire for Israel to live sincerely as well. Okay? Chapter 12, first 3 verses here of the book of the chapter 12 of Judges, and we see Ephraim not being real sincere in their faithfulness. Okay, here we go. Verse 3, the men of Ephraim gathered themselves together and went northward and said unto Jephthah, wherefore passest thou over to fight against the children of Ammon, and didst not call us to go with thee? We will burn thine house upon thee with fire. And Jephthah said